All right, so, that iconic photo of Muhammad Ali, standing over a fallen opponent. The one that's practically like, it's boxing.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that fallen figure is Sonny Liston, and his
Oh.
story is as gripping as any championship bout.
Yeah, Sonny Liston's life, it wasn't just about boxing. It was like a reflection of, the turbulent times he lived in. So
Mhm.
imagine being a black man rising up from just like poverty in the Jim Crow South, um, navigating a world where boxing was controlled by the mob. He kind of becomes this symbol of resistance.
It's a complex mix of, like, triumph and tragedy. We're going to unpack Sonny's story today. We've got boxing biographies, documentaries, historical accounts. We're trying to paint a picture of a man who was both feared and misunderstood.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is how his life sort of like intersects with, major cultural shifts like the civil rights movement. And it kind of adds this layer of like social and political significance to his boxing career.
So we're going to explore Sonny's journey, from his very difficult beginnings to his very controversial rise to fame and his untimely death, which is still shrouded in mystery. We'll examine the theories about his life, his career, and try to separate fact from fiction.
And then from the gritty boxing ring, we're going to shift gears to the world of medicine. We're going to look into the case of Dr. Anthony Pignataro, a plastic surgeon with a disturbingly dark side.
Wow, what a contrast. But I guess there are parallels too, right? Both Sonny and Dr. Pignataro were driven by ambition, and their stories really kind of expose the vulnerabilities of people who are just striving for success, in systems that are rife with power imbalances and exploitation.
Exactly. Both stories force us to kind of question our assumptions about like heroes and villains and how power can be both a blessing and a curse.
Okay, so let's start with Sonny Liston. To understand him, you have to imagine the world he was born into. Rural Arkansas during the Jim Crow era. Segregation was the law. Opportunities for black Americans were severely limited.
For anyone who might not be familiar, the Jim Crow South refers to the era of racial segregation in the southern and some border states of the United States between 1877 and the mid-1960s, characterized by legalized discrimination, disenfranchisement, and violence against black people.
Thanks for clarifying that. It's important context for understanding Sonny's journey.
Hmm.
Sonny was one of 25 children. His father was a sharecropper. They lived in poverty, just constantly struggling.
Yeah, and his childhood wasn't good. We're talking physical abuse from his father, a lack of education, just hopelessness that really, marked his early years, almost as if the system was designed to keep him trapped in this cycle of poverty and despair.
And so, as you can imagine, Sonny's tough upbringing, led him down a troubled path. He ends up in prison for robbery at a young age. It seemed like, life was headed towards a very bleak destination.
But this is where things get interesting. While in prison, Sonny's introduced to boxing by a prison chaplain, and he saw potential in Sonny's like raw strength and aggression.
It's like a classic redemption story, isn't it?
Yeah.
At least in the beginning. The tough kid with a troubled past finds, solace and purpose in the discipline of boxing.
Right.
But the road to redemption was paved with obstacles for Sonny Liston.
Yeah, his boxing talent was undeniable. But, his early career was also marked by the influence of the mob. They controlled a lot of the boxing world at the time, and this connection to organized crime just followed him his entire career.
Let's talk about Sonny's boxing style.
Hmm.
Known for his incredibly powerful jab, he could stop opponents, in their tracks. There are stories about, professional boxers quitting mid-fight after facing Sonny's jab. Imagine being so intimidated by one punch that you just give up the sport.
It's unbelievable. His physical presence was undeniable, too. He had a very stoic expression, powerful build, that infamous scowl. It's no wonder he instilled fear in his opponents. But it's also important to note that the media really, played up this intimidating image. They often use, racially charged language to portray him as menacing.
So the way Sonny was portrayed by the press definitely played a role in shaping public perception. He was often painted as the bad guy, the villain to Floyd Patterson's, good guy image.
Right. And, we have to remember the racial dynamics at play. Floyd Patterson, who was the heavyweight champion at the time, was considered a more acceptable figure for white America. Articulate, well-spoken, associated with the civil rights movement. Sonny was a brooding, powerful black man. He didn't fit the mold.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of how deep racism was in American society,
Yeah.
even in the world of sports.
Exactly. And, this racial bias was evident leading up to Sonny's championship fight against Floyd Patterson in 1962. Even President Kennedy, who was a fan of boxing, urged Patterson to not fight Sonny. He thought it would damage his image.
It's amazing that a president would get involved in a boxing match that way, but it shows the social and political significance of this fight.
Right.
And the fight was a turning point. He defeated Patterson in the first round. A knockout. Silenced the crowd. New heavyweight champion of the world.
And that moment, the stunned silence, it's as if they couldn't believe that this villain, this man they had been taught to fear, had actually won.
Yeah.
It was a victory that, challenged the racial narratives of the time. But it also marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that was filled with both triumph and controversy.
Speaking of controversy, this is where the fixed fight theories surrounding Sonny's later bouts with Muhammad Ali really come into play, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sonny's 2 fights against Ali, who was known as Cassius Clay at the time, are shrouded in speculation. The first fight, Sonny lost in a shocking upset. The second fight, he was knocked out in the first round by that infamous phantom punch. It's fueled debate among boxing fans and historians.
So what are the arguments for these fixed fight theories? Was Sonny paid to throw the fights? Were there other factors?
Well, there are several theories. It's important to be balanced. Some people say that Sonny was pressured to take a dive because of, his ties to the mob. Others point to his age, his declining health, as possible reasons for the losses.
It's fascinating to think about the different, perspectives, especially since there's no proof.
Right.
This only adds to the intrigue surrounding Sonny Liston's legacy. He was a man of talent, undeniable strength. His career was, really marred by controversy and exploitation. His story is a reminder that, even in a world like boxing, truth can be elusive.
Yeah, for sure.
So where do we go from here? What happens after these fights with Ali?
Well, Sonny's life takes another turn. He moves to Las Vegas trying to find some peace and stability, but even there, he couldn't escape the shadows of his past.
And this is where things take a tragic turn, leading to Sonny's mysterious death in 1971. But before we get into that, let's pause here.
Yeah, let's let that all sink in.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot. There's so much more to explore. So when we come back, we'll delve into the final chapter of Sonny Liston's life and examine the theories surrounding his untimely demise. Stay with us on the deep dive.
So before the break, we were talking about Sonny Liston, a man whose boxing skills were only matched by the controversy that surrounded him.
Yeah, his story is a reminder that things aren't always what they seem, especially in the world of, professional sports.
Right. And the final chapter of Sonny's life, only deepens the mystery. In 1971, he was found dead in his Las Vegas home. He was only 38.
Yeah, his death was ruled a heroin overdose, but a lot of people think there's more to the story. Sonny hated needles, and there were always these whispers of foul play.
Exactly. We have to remember the context. Even though Sonny tried to distance himself from the mob, he was still seen as a threat by some. There were people who wanted to silence him.
So what are some of the theories about Sonny's death? Was it a mob hit? Something else entirely?
There are a few possibilities, and the lack of, real evidence has just fueled speculation. Some people think Sonny was murdered, revenge for not throwing those fights against Ali. Others think maybe he was caught in the crossfire, within the drug trade, mistaken for an informant.
It's a chilling thought. A man who had endured so much, hardship meets such a tragic end.
It's a puzzle. Adds another layer of complexity to his life.
It's a reminder that even in a place like Las Vegas, where the lights are bright, the entertainment never stops. Darkness is always lurking just beneath the surface.
Ready for a change of scenery?
I think so. It's going to be tough to top the intrigue of Sonny Liston's story, but I'm definitely ready for something new.
Well, hold on to your hats, because we're going to look into a case that's just as captivating, but in a different way. From boxing rings to championship bouts, we're moving into the world of cosmetic surgery.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does a plastic surgeon's story relate to Sonny Liston's world? All that grit and violence.
The connection might not be obvious, but trust me, it's there. Both Sonny and the subject of our next deep dive, Dr. Anthony Pignataro, were driven by ambition. They both wanted to be successful.
I see. Just like Sonny's story exposed the underbelly of boxing, Dr. Pignataro's case exposes the corruption and abuse of power in the world of cosmetic surgery.
Exactly. We'll see how ambition unchecked by ethics, and compassion can have terrible consequences.
So who is Dr. Anthony Pignataro? What makes his story so interesting?
Dr. Pignataro was a plastic surgeon who seemed to have it all. He drove a red Lamborghini, wore a snap-on toupee, and had a booming practice.
Wait, a snap-on toupee? Okay, that's a detail I did not expect. It's hilarious and a little unsettling. Makes you wonder what he was hiding.
Exactly. Beneath that charm, there were problems. Some of Dr. Pignataro's colleagues from his residency called him a disaster in the operating room.
Wow. That's pretty bad, especially coming from other doctors. How did he build a successful practice with those red flags?
Dr. Pignataro was a master manipulator. He charmed patients and projected this air of confidence, and a lot of people fell for it. They overlooked the warning signs.
It's a good reminder that you can't judge a book by its cover. Sometimes the most charming people are hiding the darkest secrets.
Exactly. And in Dr. Pignataro's case, those secrets led to a series of tragic events. It started with the death of a patient, Sarah Smith. It happened during a routine breast augmentation.
That's awful. A routine surgery turns fatal. That's a nightmare for any patient. What happened during Sarah's surgery?
This is where things get really bad. Dr. Pignataro was performing surgeries in his basement.
You're kidding? A basement surgery? That sounds so dangerous.
It was. The conditions were terrible. There was no anesthesiologist, just a high school intern. The equipment was old and not well maintained.
It's hard to believe a doctor would operate that way. It's like he put profit before patient safety.
That's exactly what investigators found. During Sarah's surgery, things went wrong. Dr. Pignataro panicked. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late.
It's just a tragedy. And to make matters worse, he tried to blame Sarah, saying she had pre-existing conditions that led to her death.
She just wanted to avoid responsibility. But thankfully, the authorities didn't believe him. They investigated. And what they found was a pattern of negligence and malpractice that went way beyond Sarah's case.
So what else did they find? Were other patients hurt by Dr. Pignataro?
Yes. Investigators found a whole bunch of botched surgeries and medical errors that he tried to cover up. There was a horrifying case with a patient named Terry Lamardi. She had liposuction and suffered really bad complications.
Oh no. What happened to her? Did she recover?
Terry's story is terrible. During the liposuction, Dr. Pignataro accidentally nicked her intestine and cut off blood supply to her abdomen. But instead of getting her help, he yelled at her for going to the ER and said she was overreacting.
That's insane. How could a doctor do that?
Dr. Pignataro was arrogant. He cared more about his reputation than his patients.
It's a reminder that even in medicine, there are people who will exploit trust for personal gain.
And Dr. Pignataro's case is not unique. It's important to do your research before choosing a doctor and speak up if something feels wrong.
So what happened to Dr. Pignataro? Was he held accountable for Sarah's death and all the harm he caused?
He was charged with manslaughter for Sarah's death, but he got a plea deal, only 6 months in prison.
6 months. That doesn't seem like enough.
A lot of people agreed, but that's the legal system. Proving negligence in medical cases is hard.
It's frustrating. We need more accountability in medicine.
You're right. And Dr. Pignataro's story doesn't end there. He got out of prison and then tried to kill his wife, Debbie.
What? He tried to kill his wife. Why?
It was greed lust, and he wanted to save his reputation. He was having an affair, and his mother, who was supporting him financially, said she'd cut him off if he didn't end it.
So he saw his wife as a problem.
Yes, and he had a plan. He started poisoning her with arsenic. He wanted her death to look natural.
Arsenic poisoning? How did he even get arsenic?
He was stockpiling it, putting it in her food and drinks. He even put it in pest traps around the house, enough to kill.
That's so scary. And their daughter was poisoned, too. That's awful.
Debbie got sicker and sicker, but Dr. Pignataro acted like he cared and even tried to mess with her medical care so doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong.
Wow. He was playing God with her life, all to protect himself.
And it gets worse. He tried to kill her during surgery. He wanted to use her death to prove he was innocent in Sarah's case. He wanted to look like a grieving husband, not a killer.
It's unbelievable. I'm glad his plan failed and Debbie survived.
She's a strong woman. And the doctors who treated her were amazing, but what he did to her was horrible.
So what happened? Did he go to jail for trying to kill his wife?
Someone in jail told on him and revealed his plan. Investigators found a document he wrote called MD Mass Destruction. He had the whole plan written down.
MD Mass Destruction. It's like he thought he was above the law.
When they showed him the evidence, he confessed, but he still didn't take responsibility. He even said Debbie was suicidal.
Wow.
He was convicted of attempted murder and went back to prison. But even after he got out, he changed his name and tried to start practicing medicine again. He was advertising his services online.
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying. He didn't learn anything.
It's scary to think some people can't change no matter what.
Where is he now?
Nobody knows. He went to Florida. He's disappeared. It's scary to think about what he might be doing.
Yeah, this is a reminder that there are people out there who prey on others. We have to be careful.
Dr. Pignataro's case shows how important it is to be vigilant, question authority, advocate for yourself.
This has been a lot to process.
Yeah. But before we finish, let's think about what connects Sonny Liston's story to Dr. Pignataro's. What are the common threads?
That's a great question. And that leads us into the last part of our deep dive. We'll explore the themes of these stories.
We'll unpack ambition betrayal and the pursuit of success in a world where power can corrupt.
So we went from boxing to cosmetic surgery. It's been a wild ride.
It is fascinating how these stories, Sonny Liston and Dr. Pignataro, they both show us how ambition can be good and bad, you know, and how power can corrupt.
Yeah, they both wanted success, but it ended up destroying them in a way.
Sonny was born into poverty and prejudice, and boxing was his way out, but he was used by people in power.
And Dr. Pignataro had it all professionally, but he always had to look perfect, even if it meant hurting his patients.
I think they were both trapped in a system that valued appearances more than anything else.
It's crazy how we can be so easily fooled. People looked at Sonny and saw a villain, but nobody knew the real story.
And Dr. Pignataro was so charming that nobody suspected him. He got away with it for so long.
It shows that we can't always trust people in power. We have to think for ourselves and ask questions.
Exactly. Don't just believe everything you see or hear. Look deeper and think about the truth.
What are some key things our listeners can learn from these stories?
Be careful. There are people who will take advantage of you in any field. Watch out for manipulation and abuse.
And speak up if you see something wrong.
Right. Sonny was often forced into situations he couldn't control.
And Dr. Pignataro's patients didn't know the risks. They trusted him blindly.
So ask questions. Make sure you understand what you're getting into, especially when it comes to your health.
And we have to hold people accountable for their actions. The mob bosses who used Sonny, the medical boards who didn't stop Dr. Pignataro, there should be consequences.
Power can be dangerous if it's not controlled. We need to recognize that and create a system that protects people.
What stays with you after hearing these stories?
It makes you think about how much control we really have over our own lives. Were Sonny and Dr. Pignataro responsible for their choices, or were they victims of circumstance?
It's a tough question.
Nothing is simple. There are always different sides to the story. We have to consider that when we judge others.
So when you think about Sonny and Dr. Pignataro, think about your own life. Have you ever been pressured to do something you didn't want to do? Have you ever seen someone abuse their power?
These are important questions to ask ourselves.
That's what the deep dive is all about, making you think critically, exploring difficult topics, leaving you with more questions than answers.
We hope you'll think about these stories and how they relate to your own life. Maybe you'll see things a little differently now.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so connect with us on social media.
Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.